Over the years, I've received many requests for my testimony. I do have an older version out. This is an updated version that I shared at church recently. I hope that it blesses you. All glory to Jesus Christ who delivered me. Thanks very much for the opportunity to share my testimony here today. I haven't shared my testimony, at least not in a church, for quite a while, and it's something that I've really been looking forward to. This happened in August of 2017, and so it's been a real privilege to reflect after a long period of time to really grow in my understanding of what I believe took place on that day. So, ever since I've been saved and I've read the Bible, I've identified with Psalm 40. When I think about my salvation, I think about it in these terms and with this language. So, David writes this, and I'm just going to read 1 to 3 really quickly. So he says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. And I'm ashamed to say today that before God saved me, I was certainly not seeking Him. I was somebody in desperate need of healing from the great physician, but I was in rebellion against him. And so I cannot empathize with David saying that I was waiting patiently for the Lord. I was not waiting patiently for the Lord. So my family moved here from South Africa really early on in my life when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And there's not that much to say about my childhood. I had a really good childhood. My parents provided for us. We had a lot of stability. But as a teenager, I became increasingly rebellious, as I'm sure David would testify to. I was entitled. I was arrogant. I was a slave to sin. I was haughty, obnoxious. But above all else, I was ignorant. I was extremely ignorant about who God was, who I was, and what my relationship was to this holy God. So I was puffed up with the knowledge of the world. I thought I was too intelligent or special to believe in God. I thought we'd moved beyond that superstition as a society. When I was growing up in high school, particularly around 2010, atheism was really, really popular. And so I was listening to a lot of internet atheists. I took their ideas as my own. And I thought whatever God I knew in my childhood no longer had any relevance in my life. So I left school. I graduated and I went to a secular university. I studied business. And while I was doing that, I was working a series of jobs and I became involved with the wrong crowd. And drugs very quickly became a huge part of my life. I was particularly fond of party drugs, so like MDMA, cocaine, things like that. But it quickly turned into a bit of an addiction, a lot of an addiction actually. And while I was experimenting with these different drugs, I began to become interested in psychedelic drugs in particular. So I took like large doses of LSD and I had a series of really what I thought at the time were profound experiences on these drugs. It wouldn't be fitting to get into the nature of those experiences, particularly on the Lord's Day, but it was a huge part of my life. And I believe now, retrospectively, of course, that this opened me up to the demonic realm. I don't believe that when people take illicit drugs like psychedelics, they're just experiencing the natural world. I don't believe that we are merely our brain chemistry. I believe that something bigger than that is going on. And I think that's why it's forbidden in the New Testament. But so I became involved in that. But I was not satisfied with drugs. I also began to participate and dabble in the occult. I did a lot of different things in the occult, and it all started after I started taking psychedelic drugs. So I never intentionally identified with any particular esoteric system, but I did do things including making ritual contracts in my own blood in the pursuit of spiritual authority and control. So that was occurring in the background, but I was not satisfied with the drugs or demonic activity. I was also incredibly promiscuous as a teenager. I used women to gratify my base instincts and desires, and used is unfortunately the appropriate term. I would lie, cheat, I did not see them as image bearers worthy of respect. I used them as objects there for my gratification. I was also involved in all sorts of immoral behavior that it would be really unwise to discuss, particularly considering this is recorded. Um, but I was around a lot of people that were involved in some pretty serious criminal activity. I was around deceitful, violent, and wicked men, and I was myself a deceitful, violent, and wicked man. Eventually, I brought myself to the very bottom of that pit of destruction, and I began to become plagued by a deep existential anxiety and depression and a violent temper that was ruining my life. I hurt a lot of people around me, um, physically and emotionally. And it got to the point where I was suicidal, lost, and empty. And the worst part of it all was I completely deserved it. And God would have been completely just to leave me there in that pit of despair. But God is not only just, He is merciful. And He decided to have mercy on me, not because of anything that is within me, but because of who He is. And so, long story short, I connected with Rachel. Rachel and I went to high school together. And Rachel was somebody that always stood out to me. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also pure, which is not something that I was used to, particularly with the women that I associated with. And she reflected the holy God that she served. And I saw that even as an unbeliever. And it left a huge impression on me, even from high school. And so Rachel suggested that I speak with her dad, Sam, who is a pastor. And I didn't really know what to expect, and I had a lot of anxiety, but I decided to go and to speak with Sam. And so I went, I was attending a church in Eltham at the time. I went to their church offices, and I was pacing up and down in the parking lot, smoking cigarettes and thinking, what am I doing? And while it was partly just due to me thinking it was strange that I'm going to go see a pastor, is the spiritual world real? Am I getting this desperate for answers that I'm going to a pastor now? After all the psychedelic drugs, after all the reading, after all the philosophy, I'm going to a pastor. I thought I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel because that's how ignorant I was. And on top of that, I was very fearful that I was going to hurt him. Something within me was convinced that I would act out violently if I was to go inside a church or if I was to come near a pastor. I really didn't. The thought of it made me extraordinarily uncomfortable, and I wanted to flee. And I can't fully explain that. Um, but I think as we continue on in this testimony, it'll become obvious why. Um, so I want to make this really brief, but in that moment, once I had met Sam, we talked a little bit about my life, and Sam shared the gospel with me. And I'd heard the gospel before, but it stood out to me in a way that was completely new and profound. And on that day, it was in August of 2017, I believe it was August the 7th, I encountered the holy God that I said I didn't believe in. And in that moment, the Spirit did what only He can do. He took out my heart of stone and He gave me a heart of flesh. And He put a new song in my mouth, which is the words David uses. And while a deliverance followed, I want you to know that that is literally the least important part of this entire story. I think people often get caught up in that. And over the years, when I've shared my testimony, this is something people ask about. And I understand that, but it is so secondary to what I'm about to share with you that I really don't want it to become a focus of my testimony today. So, the main thing I remember about the entire discussion with Sam, upon hearing the gospel, I understood my state before God and I understand who God is. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. It's from Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah has a vision in the year that King Uzziah died, and he sees the Lord sitting on his throne. And he writes this. He says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood two seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And I remember it hit me like a truck. It was this profound experience of understanding all the sin that I had been involved in, all the commandments that I had violated, and I knew without a doubt that I stood before a holy God condemned. I knew I had no excuse. I knew I had nowhere to hide. I knew I had no hope outside of Christ. I knew he was powerful and I was weak. I knew he was wise and I was foolish. I knew he was holy and I was sinful, and I was terrified. But alongside that realization came an inexplicable sense of peace that despite all my sin, I could rest secure. Because God, being rich in mercy, had made a way for me to be with him because he is so gracious. I knew my life would have to change. I knew I'd have to leave behind my sin and trust in Jesus, my high priest, before a holy God. And upon a valid profession of faith, Sam, I believe in the authority of Jesus, cast multiple demons out of me. I physically felt them leave. Um, I don't like to get into this because people focus on this, but I did feel them leave. I had no doubt in my mind that I was very literally possessed by demons after that experience. I used to suffer from horrible, intrusive thoughts, very violent, vulgar thoughts at times. I would have violent and vulgar visions regularly, and it all ceased that day. After the deliverance, it completely stopped. Um, I had OCD-like symptoms. And I don't believe OCD is necessarily demonic, but I had these symptoms that manifested in a particular way. And after that day, they completely vanished. 100%, they were gone. And that doesn't happen for everyone. That's not everyone's story when they come to Christ. But more importantly, everything changed in my life. I ended up getting sober, which I never thought would be possible. I really struggled to get off drugs, particularly marijuana. Um, I dropped out of my secular university course and I was at MST within 6 months. And of course, many of you know I ended up marrying Rachel. And I am still to this day stumbling forward, trying to serve Jesus Christ. I am completely committed to his church and its mission in the world. And in the words of David, he has put a new song in my mouth. The new song he has placed in my mouth is his gospel, and it is my testimony. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to have shared it with you all today. So thank you for listening.